kind of like something that I've seen on social media in terms of Brett Favre and the Boston Celtics head coach. I don't really know what his name is. I'm not like this huge basketball fan, but I do want to discuss this whole aspect of, oh, well, Brett Favre, he basically committed fraud. He's a horrible person. And there's a lot of corruption that occurs everywhere. Like, rich people do corruption all the time. And yes, it should be talked about more. But I think it's the Boston Celtics head coach had an affair with his fiance on like a Boston Celtics staffer or something like that, someone who works for the Boston Celtics. And there's a rumor that he might get suspended for the entire season. And they're saying that this is something that is explicitly written in their contract that you cannot do, that you cannot have a relationship with someone else in the organization or consequences will happen. Everyone has seen The Office, right? What was it? Michael and I forget her name. The character that Michael Scott ends up marrying. I always forget what her name is, but she worked for HR, or Holly, that was her name, Holly. Holly worked for HR, and Michael was the regional manager of the Scranton Dunder Mifflin. And when the people in charge of Dunder Mifflin found out that they were having a relationship and they didn't tell anybody about it, well, Holly had to go and work for another branch. So what people need to understand is that, especially if you are the head coach of a sporting team, right? I remember when this happened to Rich Rod, and when it happened to Coach Orgeron, Coach O of LSU, because I'm a huge Arizona Wildcats fan. I remember what happened to Rich Rod. They both had extramarital affairs, and they went bye-bye, right? The same thing is in play here, because number one, like he's engaged. So the coach of the Boston Celtics, he's engaged, and that's their business. But at the same time, when it comes to an organization, they don't want that stuff to happen. They don't want people having relationships with each other, because that stuff could get extremely messy if it ends up being bad. Also, being the head coach of a basketball team or any sporting team, you have a finite amount of power over people. And I'm not saying that assault happened, but with that power, you could force somebody to kind of do something that they don't want to do. And people are talking about it. Rightfully, people are talking about it because it's sports media. Now, a lot of people are upset that people are talking about this more than the Brett Favre thing, which people are talking about the Brett Favre thing. Number one, let me just say right now, right, Brett Favre frauded a bunch of poor people. And yes, that needs to be talked about more. That needs to be something that is discussed ad nauseum, because that should not be happening. It shouldn't. Neither thing should be happening. I will go as far as to say that, yes, frauding poor people is worse than having an affair and being the head coach of a basketball team. It's worse. But here's the difference, right? Brett Favre is not in athletics anymore. He's not an athlete anymore. He's not a coach. He's not in football. He's not in professional sports. He's in the public eye, but he's not in professional sports. So I would say, yes, you need to talk about that. But if one of my biggest pet peeves is when, something bad happens and something else that's worse happens. People are 100% more likely to come out and deflect. Oh, why aren't you talking about that? Why aren't you talking about that more? Because people are talking about it. People are discussing it. Articles are coming out about it. ESPN is talking about it. ESPN is discussing it. That's something called a logical fallacy. That's something called a deflection, right? I go up to somebody and I say, hey, it's real sunny out. It's a real nice day. And then someone responds by saying, well, it's rainy in this part of the world. Okay. But what I'm saying is that I always like to be consistent about my arguments. I always like to be consistent about what I'm saying. And I always make sure that I'm not kind of deflecting to something else. Defrauding poor people, especially defrauding poor kids, is awful. And especially wealthy people who make up charities in order to better themselves and better their monetary value. It's disgusting and it's sick. And this isn't the first time Brett Favre has done something like this. He is notorious for being not so good of a guy. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the Boston Celtics head coach did what he did. These two things don't have anything to do with each other. But for whatever reason, certain people don't like this thing to be talked about, so they're going to try to talk about this thing to deflect. Both things are bad. Yes, what Brett Favre did was worse, but here we are. Here we are with this, and we're discussing it right now, obviously.